Hello everyone, this is Akira. This is me, my colleague, and that we are talking about what are the kind of noodles are great for shoyu ramen, and we get asked this question a lot, so well, why not do this on the class? And then so we're doing it, and maybe he's gonna make great noodles for shoyu ramen, and so let's get started. So like what we're gonna do is like I'm gonna go through just a little bit of lecture, and I hope you guys gonna be able to like bear with me. And maybe he's gonna make the noodles from scratch, and we are going to show you guys how to cook the noodles and how to put them together in the bowl later in the kitchen. So please stay tuned till the end of the class. I appreciate it. And so let's get started. So yeah, shoyu ramen. Yeah, shoyu ramen, and shoyu ramen is like of course like the most popular, like one of the most like oldest type of ramen in Japan, and the history of ramen. Well, it's very short, but like 100 years. Uh, but shoyu ramen, like there are different types of shoyu ramen. There are many types of them, and particularly we are talking about regional shoyu ramen, and because kind of like looking at like different regional shoyu ramen, we can kind of get a hint of like kind of noodles are used and like because these regional noodle ramen noodles, shoyu ramen noodles are like been around for a while. That means that like you know there are a certain number of people who like them and like the combination, like the pattern, combining patterns of like coupling patterns of noodles and soups, right? So that's a good sign for us to kind of start. Like that's a good start, right? Just kind of in search for great noodles, suitable for shoyu ramen. Yeah, so we're gonna explore yeah just a little bit of technical aspects of like how to make shoyu ramen noodles and yeah, then we're gonna make shoyu ramen from scratch and we're going to move to our kitchen and then we're gonna show you guys how to cook shoyu ramen noodles. So yeah, regional ramen. There are so many regional ramen like across Japan. Then shoyu ramen may be the like most. Oh, there are many like probably most types of like regional ramen in terms of like shoyu ramen. And yeah, across Japan like from north to south. And yeah, so the like most south or like, most south regional shoyu ramen, like in the north south, north, right? Is like Asahikawa ramen, and like Asahika City in Hokkaido, and this particular region ramen, like it's as you can see, they like this particular shop, right? Ramen Aoba is it's in the picture, the shoyu ramen they serve, right? And then so it's basically light soup, right? Like soup, and then typically made of like various types of ingredients, right? Pork bones, like chicken covers, and seafood and vegetables. And they're typical of this type of soup is called double soup. Like it means that like they use two types of different ingredients to make the base stock, right? And then plus shoyu tare and then so they usually use like pork bones, and then they use like some types of like seafood in their base stock, and yeah, so yeah, it's like Asahikawa is like place where it's very cold, right? Like it gets as cold as probably minus 30 degrees during the winter. It's like it's really cold, right? So when you get served bowl of hot noodle soup, but like gets cold fast, right? And uh, so to prevent that, right? To prevent that, like they add kind of layer of lard or like some kind of oil, right, on the surface of soup, and then that kind of helps like from soup from getting colder. And noodles are slow hydration, relatively thinner and curly, and yeah, this particular ramen shop like called like Aoba Ramen, and so they serve this boiled ramen like that's kind of light soup, but like like deep in umami, and the noodles are thin and hard, and a strongly wheat flavor, and it's very well balanced. And then let me show you some illustration of like how it's a bad picture, but like once you like dip noodles in there, and then like noodles get coated with the oil as well, and then so this layer of flavored oil, like lard or something, kind of cover the soup, right? Like, and then kind of like protects the soup from like cold, like cold temperature, ambient temperature. So that's how it works. And Kitakata ramen, right, is like city in Fukushima Prefecture. Like that's kind of still north, right, north of the Japan, and it's actually one of the highest. Like this is actually one of the highest number of like ramen shops per population in Japan, right? And there are many ramen shops that are open from the morning, right? So like some people it kind of sounds kind of crazy, but like some people eat both ramen for breakfast, right, before going to work. And the this region, Kitakata, is like very rich with the like high quality water. So they use this water to make noodles and soups, right? And the noodles are typically like high in hydration and very thick noodles. And so that's Kitakata ramen. Like it's very, very famous Shoyu ramen, region ramen. And Shirakawa ramen is another region ramen. Like again, like that's kind of in the northern part of Japan, and actually same prefecture as Kitakata. And this one started from like kind of very small bistro restaurant. They serve like both ramen, and then they actually make noodles by hand, and in this kind of both translucent soup with soy sauce, right? And of course, like they make noodles by hand, so like the noodles are high in hydration, and then flat noodles. And so a lot of shops like that serve this type of regional ramen actually stemmed from this small bistro restaurant. Okay, and Tokyo ramen, like it's almost like doesn't need like any explanation, but like there are countless number of types of ramen in Tokyo, but like including Tokyo ramen, that's Shoyu ramen, the long history, right? Because the I think the first bowl of ramen that's ever served in Japan was Shoyu ramen, and what's conventional and consists of that's like a soup that's like transparent and base stock made of pork, chicken, and combined with seafood stock made of like dry sardine and other things, other seafood. Uh, Shoyu taro is added to complete the soup, and then noodles are typically curly and they're on the thinner side. Okay, LK ramen, right? LK ramen, is also known as like Yokohama ramen, and this particular bowl is a picture of like the ramen that's served at Yoshimura, yeah, that's a name ramen shop. They actually started selling this bowl ramen. So they basically like combined, tonkotsu soup like that was already famous, right, in Kyushu, and then so taking this thick Kyushu tonkotsu stock and then just combine it with shoyu soup like a tare of Tokyo ramen, right? And then so how that's how they created this bowl. And but the noodles are unique in that they're thick and reverse cut, meaning the thickness of the noodles is larger than the width, which I'm going to explain that more about later. But what's interesting is that like customers can actually adjust the noodle hardness, strength of the soup, right? Like strength of soup, like or how much tare they want to put in, right? And then like quantity of oil that they want in the soup. So it's yeah, so like when they order, they can do that. So it's kind of interesting. And Kyoto, right? Kyoto ramen, and so the image of like food and cuisine like Tokyo, I mean Kyoto are sort of like sophisticated, subtle, they're light taste, right? And but like when it comes to the ramen, there are many shops that like go in the opposite direction. So like in thick, heavy, darker soy sauce ramen, and this particular shop, the oldest one of the oldest Kyoto ramen shops in Shinpuku Saikan, and there are many other ramen shops that serve like ramen that's heavier. And well, Kyoto ramen, well, there are some like ramen brands that have actually like a lot of chain outlets across Japan. Wakayama ramen is also like very famous shoyu ramen. Uh, that's regional ramen, and this particular ramen shop like Ide Shoten, right? It's like one of the oldest, right? One of the oldest Wakayama ramen, and so they they basically do the soup, right? With um, so like basically use like pork bones and chicken bones, like it's very thick stock, right? And then they add of course this um, well shoitare and yeah, then like so they add this soy sauce like tare to very viscous like emulsified stock of that's made of like pork and like to adjust the taste, right? And then um, so there's a like umami pork bones like but without like unpleasant smell of fat um, that yeah and they show them right makes this soup like this me making this soup right it's very like color like kind of brownish color, but like noodles are straight and thin and yellow. And uh, yeah, the Wakanda is kind of pretty interesting place. It has like its own sort of like ramen culture. So if you happen to be in Wakayama, please yeah try that. Pick your ramen shop and Onomichi ramen. Like so, we're kind of going to the west side of Japan, and Onomichi ramen like it's in Hiroshima and well, the definition of onomichi ramen though is like often vague, and it's hard to quite clearly define like what an authentic onomichi ramen is. But the most famous ramen shop in Onomichi City, Sh Shukan serves like a ramen without using seafood ingredients. Though, yeah, many onomichi ramen shops serve ramen using like seafood ingredients. So it's vague, it's like we don't really, but like the strong feature of like onomichi ramen, maybe like shoyu and relatively thick noodles and pork back fat is used on the on the soup and so that you can see that like kind of oil kind of floating in the soup. Okay, so and then the last one Tokushima ramen and it's like in a well the Tokushima prefecture like it's in Shikoku Island and its regional ramen is categorized by the color of the soup and there's white, yellow, brown. And then the brown soup Tokushima ramen is like the most well known. And soup is made of like thick tonkotsu stock with like a good amount of like shoyu tare. Like they put a lot, well, relatively good, a large amount of like more shoyu moto dare. And the overall taste is like on a kind of sweeter, kind of bit of saltier side. And the noodles are soft and relatively thick. And instead of chashu, right, they put thin slice of pork belly instead. And then there's some ramen shops like they add like kind of like fresh egg like on the side, and then they crack it into the soup. So we can sort of kind of map like different like regional shop ramen like soup, right? That like a darker, lighter, like milder, thicker, kind of like this in the map, and we can also like the noodles, right? Noodles, terms like hydration, and noodle size and shape. You can categorize them by these variables. And you can also like put them in the map, right, of this kind of noodle texture map. Exactly like well hydration, vertical axis that's like protein content of the flour, like to you make these noodles, and also the noodle size, right? Like going going up like thinner, going down thicker. Okay, so and then another one I kind of wanted to like kind of talk about is that this particular shop, right, Ramen Shima in Tokyo, serves this like star bowls of like shoyu ramen. This particular tsukemen, right, it consists of like noodles, is soaked in dashi, right, dashi made of like kelp and special bonito flakes, and you get served with bowl of dipping soup, right, with base stocks made up like from like local chicken and like seafood and shoyu tare. And then so like when you dip the noodles with that like kelp dashi in it, right? Like and into the soup, a certain amount of like kelp dashi like it's dissolved and it's kind of sliminess from kelp, like it's mixed with the soup, right? So the more you eat the noodles, like dip in it and the soup, right? So the kind of taste and flavors kind of change over time, and so it's kind of interesting. So if you happen to be in like Tokyo, like please try this shop and like let us know your feedback. Uh, okay, so shoyu, right? Shoyu and kind of shoyu in relation to noodles, right? And then so that like one aspect of that, like I wanted to talk about is the color, right? Color of the shoyu, and then so there's like lighter shoyu and darker shoyu, and well, in contrast with like, I mean, in relation with like noodles, right? The color is kind of important. So like darker, then like the color of noodles like tends to be like brighter yellow, um, kind of like kind of beautiful contrast, like yellow and black, and so it's the color is also kind of important, like in terms of like noodles as well. So like when you're making like a shoyu ramen noodles, then you should also think about okay, the color of noodles, like kind of what um, so what's the color of like new soup, right? So then you want to sort of like care for what the color of your noodles as well. So so this is kind of well, this is the typical noodle texture chart, and shoyu ramen kind of well sits well, I guess like this this area, right? So these are basically variations of these like shoyu ramen noodles, and well, there are of course like thin ones, and there are thicker ones, and there are like curlier ones, there are softer ones, like harder ones. And so like when you're developing like noodles like suitable for shoyu ramen, these are the questions that we should ask ourselves. And what kind of soup are the noodles going to be coupled with? And then noodle texture, so very important. Like then noodle texture. So we need to like kind of figure out like okay, what kind of protein we need like for the wheat flour that we can use, and then what's the hydration, right? Hydration. So like higher hydration, softer, and noodle size. Well, it's going to be thicker, thinner. The shape, right? Like is it like round shape, like squared, but like kind of flat, or yeah, curly or straight? Leave curly, like how curly do you want the noodles to be? And are we adding some kind of flavors like colors, the attributes, chili flavors like green, colored, like gluten-free, whatever. So we wanna ask ourselves this question before. Then talking about noodle texture, so protein of the flour is important. Like higher the protein, the harder. And ash, the ash kind of like brings the color. Well, the more ash contained in the flour, like the darker the color. So and then viscosity is another thing that's controls like so how elastic the noodle be. And so constructing your noodle recipes, these are the kind of variables like we should be aware of. And then, um, yeah, shoyu ramen usually, yeah, there could be like actually like cold noodles too. Well, or in the summer maybe. Then, but when we are talking about shoyu ramen noodles, we typical like we wanna ask us like are they straight or curly, and what we like so. And so these are the sort of, well, usually the shoyu ramen noodles tend to be like kind of medium size, and they're like like kind of high, like it's categorized as kind of medium hydration noodles. So the liquid solids, the like protein, 11% ash, like 0.34%, and liquid like water and constant salt. So this is kind of typical recipes for shoyu ramen noodles. And then hydration, or it's hydration 25% and 45%, and like the dough would be like totally different. And ingredients like kansi is something that we need to have in the ramen, like noodles to be called ramen, right? So we talked about like potassium carbonate, sodium carbonate, what are the ratio of these, and right. And then the cutters, right? Cutters. So typically like ramen machine, like ramen noodle machines, we use this kind of cutter. And for sure ramen noodles, like there could be like soup noodles, like a lighter version, lighter soup, right? and thicker ones, right? 2.2 to like maybe 3.0, that's width, and dipping noodles, and then like kind of dense, heavier soup noodles. Okay, and so this is how we make the noodles, and then well, that's a roller, right? That's a roller, like set of rollers, and then like there's a like roller gap, and like the dough gets through, right? The roller, and then like gets thin, and goes to into the cutter, which is like kind of paper shredder, but like, and then gets cut into the noodle strand, right? Um, so this is the shape of like kind of square shape, and but like there are many other shapes that you can make, and square, rectangular, and flat. All these can be made with the same shape of cutter. And there's a round cutter, there's a like edgy cutter, and then that's a reverse cut like I was talking about. Well, when we were talking about like the IK ramen noodles, and so the width, right? Width is smaller than the thickness, right? So usually width is bigger than thickness because the where the thickness is are the surface, right? That this part is it where the cooking water goes in and like soup goes in, right? So there's a big area, like big area of like for new water and the soup, like liquid to go into. Um, they so that makes so like these noodles are actually prone to getting soft faster in the hot soup. Kind of different texture. And then how you can make curly, right? And then curliness is kind of important, like when you're talking about the shoyu ramen noodles. So we use this usually. We yeah making them curly by like using this uh, kind of like plates, kind of silicone plates that we put in the back of the cutter, and so that noodles goes into this cutter, right? And then like well shred it into like noodle strands, right? And then like they get trapped, right? Trapped between this between like silicone plates, and then well in the process like they get curly, right? Then they they get pushed out, and so that's how they get curly. And okay, so I think you're ready to start making noodles that are great for shoyu ramen. And okay, so you have ingredients over here, and so as we were talking about, this is a flour, like flour, but like flour with like protein content like 11%, and then the ash, right? Ash is like as low as possible, so that you don't affect the color of the noodles. And we have water, the salt, and kansi here. And so these are the liquid ingredients, and that's solid ingredients. Okay, so let's get started. So yeah, so the mixer, this is the 10 kilogram mixer, and so that means that you can mix up to 10 kilograms of solid ingredients up to right maximum, and on top of it you're adding liquid, right? On top of that you're adding liquid. So the maximum you can make about up to like 14 kilograms of dough at a time. And yeah, so you need to dissolve all the country and salt, right, in the water, and make this kind of solution, and add it to the flour, the dough, right? Yeah, so make sure that all the salt and country are dissolved in the water, right, before you add it. And All right, so she's setting the timer and adding water, right? And then directly onto that mixer lid. So mixer lid has this holes, right? Holes, and then so this water will drip through the holes, and then add it to the flour little by little. For that's for good hydration. And yeah, of course, like maybe like made the dough like in dance, right? So that we can move to next process. And can you guys notice that like kind of yellow, how yellow that like that dough is, right? Before, right, it's the same, exact same recipe, and then like before it was like, you know, completely white, right? Completely white, like when it was like just for flour, but now it's like kind of well, kind of pale yellow, right? Looking more like ramen noodles. It's it's because of the effect of the consistency, especially the potassium carbonate that like potassium carbonate, sodium carbonate, and then potassium carbonate like did a job of like kind of coloring the um, dough into the yellow color. And so what we're doing now is that like we are just making the sheet of dough, right? Sheet of dough. So making this sheet, feeding the dough into the roller, and so the dough is coming out, right, to the sheet shaped dough. And so you're basically making a sheet of dough, and that's how we start. And so before it was like kind of crumbles of like dough, right? And then now it's kind of being turned into a sheet, dough sheet, right? And by looking at the kind of size of the dough, right, you can pretty much tell like how much, I mean, what the hydration ratio is. And hydration ratio is basically like you can calculate it by dividing the amount of like solid by the amount of like liquid. Like, but like we always use weight, so like grams, like pounds. Um, so we need to like we don't use like units of measurement like liters or anything. We always go by weight. Okay, um, 'cause it's more precise. And so uh, yeah, so like dividing, for example, like if this is 2 kilograms of solid ingredients, right? And then if we add 1 kilograms, is it? 1 kilograms? No, sorry, 2 kilograms. So like, I'm sorry, like so like you need to like divide liquid ingredients, right, amount by solid ingredients amount. So yeah, so if it's like 1 kilo, then 2 kilos, like, so that's 50% hydration. And typically, like we are talking about, like shoyu ramen noodles, they're typically in the kind of um, high, like mid hydration, like medium range. So like 30, we're talking about like 30% to like maybe 37, 8, around there. And so we now have like this sheet of dough that's like really still rough, meaning like it's fragile, right? It's weak, and so we want to have, you know, kind of firmer, like noodle texture, like has like a lot of bite, right? And so we're just going to do the separate it and combining them like this, combining like so separating like one was one, right? But like separating on two and combining them through the roller, and so that in this way, kind of working the dough, right? Working the dough, just like, yeah, just like, working out, like, kind of building a muscle. So we're like, trying to build the well, gluten structure inside the dough. And so that's like what, this process is doing. And in the mixer side, right? So that was 4 minutes. right? That was 4 minutes, and then uh, usually like for good hydration, we just do a 4 minutes right first, and then do the rest of the minutes like after we put the rest of the water. So it was just about like 2 thirds of water or so, she first put in, and then we'll mix it for 4 minutes, and then kind of clean the inside or inside the mixer. There are some parts that are like wetter than the other parts, so like kind of like mix them up, and then um, yeah, do the rest of the minutes, and then add the rest of water, and do it for 6 more minutes. And total number like time that we do is 10 minutes for this dough. And so basically, hydration determines the like kind of mixing time as well. Basic rule is, the well, the lower the hydration, the less hydration, the longer the mixing time. And so now she's doing like another round of like combining process. So we usually do it like 1 to 2 times depending on what kind of noodles we're making. And so this is a second combining process. And yeah, from this point on, like we want to start like dusting the dough, and to of course like keep dough from sticking. And yeah, so depending on hydration level, like hydration ratio, you may want to dust more or less, right? Um, it's a medium hydration ratio noodles, so we don't have to dust as much as like the high hydration ratio noodles, like kind of more like wetter noodles, prone to sticking more. And yeah, so me just making sure that like the dough is like kind of double, like kind of evenly, right? So that like all the area of like dough sheet is like kind of well evenly compounded, so that like that kind of texture, right, is gonna be like the same throughout the noodles. So so after combining process, like all we have to do is just thin it, right? Thin it to the final thickness. Final thickness would be, like depends on your like, yeah, the cutter you use, or yeah, basically, that thickness that you want, right? So that really, yeah, exactly like we're talking about, like the noodle size and the shape. It's like if you're making flat noodles or like kind of square shaped noodles, or so it really depends on the kind of noodle you're making. So so the uh, the reason like she's doing not around sheeting is that like we want to, well, retain the noodle texture, right? We don't want to like thin it, drastically thin it, because that would like damage like the noodle texture that we are building, what we built, right? So through the combining process, so that's why we do it like kind of gradually, so thin it like gradually, but like usually do like by uh, yeah, apply this rule like 30% reduction rate, and uh, yeah, so like each round of like sheeting, like we reduce that like thickness by 30% approximately. Okay, 1.5. Okay, so let's measure the thickness of dough, and that this dough gone through like roll gap like 1.5 millimeter, but like actual thickness is 1.9568, 2.1, 2.1, 2.1. So like there's a difference of 0.6 millimeter. So that's how like noodles, kind of bounce back, and then well, it actually thickness actually uh, expands right after it's gone through the roller gap with its dough, and so the actual thickness is always bigger than the roller gap roller quinoas. And it's the kind of kata we use, and then like kind of well the Slita kata, and then this particular kata is actually for Aike ramen, like we talked about, like a reverse cut noodles, and so this kata is different in the way that like the grooves, like grooves are deeper than usual, and because Aike ramen, like the thickness is larger, right? So we need to have like kind of deeper grooves to be able to like cut the dough through, cut the dough sheet through. So it's so there's a special cutter for it. If you use this, well, if you use a regular cutter, then we wouldn't be able to like cut the Aiki ramen noodles through. They may get stuck right in the cutter. Okay, so we're ready to go. That's number 18. It's number 18. So number 18 is like 1.7 millimeter in width. 1.7 millimeter in width, and the thickness is about like 1.1, 1.0, 1.5, 1.6, 1.4. And well, with this machine, like you can adjust the length of the noodles, right? Length of noodles, and so this length of noodles determines the your portion size, serving size, right? So if you want to have like bigger serving size, you want to make it longer, you want to make them longer. If you want to have like shorter, I mean smaller serving size, like you want to make them shorter. It's very easy, like just a touch of a knob, and it's very easy. Yeah, shoyu ramen, like usually the serving size would be like 120 grams or like 130 grams, but it really depends on the ramen shop that you're eating that, and because they have like some service like they can give you like one portion noodle like free, or an additional portion of noodles free or some, or because like the cost of like making just one portion noodle is very low, and so compared to like other things, so it kind of makes sense for them to give them free you know portion noodles to make customers happy. And so let's move to our kitchen where we cook them. Right, so this is our showroom, and it's our kitchen, and we've got we've got some soup, we got some noodles, and so yesterday I made some noodles and for shoyu ramen, and then uh, so like this is like 2.5 millimeter like width, right? And then but like it's kind of flat noodles, and then um, so we I um, so the Kitakata ramen that we are talking about, like in Shiraka ramen, we are talking about, like they actually um, do them by hand, right? Like no, like curl them by hand, right? So, for example, like just kind of you have to like put some actual force in your hands, right, to make it like that. And so, kind of curl, make him curly like by hand, like kind of give you guys like kind of randomness, right? Well, curliness, randomness. But like this one is made using the kata, right? Made using the kata. So as you may be able to see that, like the curliness, right? It's kind of like there's a pattern, right? Like kind of same pattern, but like if you call them by hand, then the curliness is kind of random. So like kind of it's just kind of like unique texture. Yeah. So that's the kind of difference between doing by machine and doing by hand. Okay. Right, so let's cook some noodles. And okay, which one do we want to cook? Let's cook the one that Megumi just made, and let's cook the ones that are I made like yesterday, and like this thick curry noodle by hand. Okay, let's get started, and let's do that one with the one I cooked yesterday. I mean that I made yesterday. All right, so. Hmm. So that cooking time kind of varies, right? From like kind of depending on the preference of the customers as well. Usually we do it from scratch, but like today we're just doing it like just to show you guys how to cook noodles and like so this soup, right? For example, like that's um, that has everything, right? Like tare and stock, and then yeah, the oil already in there. So everything in there, and so like kind of light soy sauce, like shoyu, like we were talking about in the I mean before. And this one, right? This one is kind of uh, more like tonkotsu shoyu, and it's like kind of ieke kind of style um, soup. I guess that kind of yeah. So kind of heavier and like shoyu, like tare, shoyu tare. So it kind of makes sense to couple this soup with the noodles like Igmi just made. So I put actually like for these noodles I put a bit like pigment to make them like kind of bright yellow. So um, you can't really make noodles like this yellow without using kind of pigment like or eggs, right? Well, eggs, they make them a little bit yellow, but like not as much as not as yellow as this noodles. So yeah, make sure like you strain the noodles like well, so that you're not diluting the soup, right? With the water you get out of the cooking water. Yeah, and then after you put the noodles in, they're like you want to, well, kind of make them straight and for the presentation. All right, so let's do the other one. And we are cooking the noodles like in this stock pot, right? Like it's not really how we cook noodles, ramen noodles especially. And yeah, there's like a proper noodle cooker, and that noodle cooker has like everything, like like strong power, like um, you can have like a faucet, right? Faucet to, well, just add water, ideally hot water, little by little, and to sort of like keep the water, cooking water, kind of clean. And then it has like a drainage, right? Drainage overflow. So like when like like when you cook noodles and like you cook more and more noodles, like the water gets dirty, right? Dirty with like calcium and salt and everything. And then the effectiveness of like efficiency of the cooking noodles, right? Cooking water as like kind of diminishes like over time, right? So we want to like keep the water clean as much as possible, and so that the effectiveness, like kind of, well, I'm talking about like time it takes to cook noodles. So it's improved. Like, so you want to have like a noodle cooker that just has a faucet, right? Water supply, and the drainage, right? Drainage to, well, kind of overflow the dirty water, and then like drain it out, and then but add the clean water, right? At the same time. So, and then you should have like the power, right? To, well, when you add water, and then like of course like temperature drops, right? So but you want to like keep the temperature as high as possible all the time. So so you want those three things: um, the faucet, like water supply, drainage, and then the power, right? Strong power of like cooking the heating the water back up like as quickly as possible. So okay, so cooking. Uh, so that's kind of like IK ramen noodles, but like some of them are actually more curly, and but like definitely kind of reverse cut um, noodles. So um, it's very different. Right. So yeah, we have like other types of like noodles. We made for like shoyu ramen, but um, yeah, but you guys can try them and then try making them, and then like if you are interested in like making all these different types of noodles, like feel free to leave on comments, and then like yeah, we can give you guys some hints, and like we can talk about, well, if you are already making ramen, right, and then well, I'm making like I have this kind of like shoyu soup, right, and then we can give you guys like kind of advice like on, okay, what kind of, well, yeah, this kind of noodle may be like great for your shoyu ramen. We can talk about something like that. So please feel free to like leave no comments, and thank you so much. Bye bye.